Third, welcome to Dr. Cooper, who joins us as an experienced healthcare professional with a history of success across healthcare settings, coming from a community and long-term care practice experience, now working in problem solving in the world of data and a key goal to really work towards improving healthcare outcomes. And I'm excited to have Dr. Cooper here today in this topic of how to build a database portfolio because of some of the great opportunities to share what we've been through together and the transitions between those positions. I'll pause for a moment to let Dr. Cooper share a little bit about what he does day to day, as well as what a typical day might look like for a pharmacist who's thinking about working in data. And as everyone is always welcome to share in the chat questions you may have. Dr. Cooper, the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak and kind of tell my story. It's been an exciting ride over the last year or so that this is kind of going on. But for a kind of day in the life of what I do right now, so primarily I work as a BI analyst, specifically with Power BI, among the other different tools that we do use. Power BI is the one that I primarily use. And I work for Blend 360, which is a data and business intelligence consulting firm based out of Columbia, Maryland. And what we do is we have several different clients across several different industries. And we develop all kinds of things for them on many different levels. We have a data science and data engineering division that does all kinds of data modeling and that kind of tools. I specifically work in business intelligence and data visualization in that kind of department. So I am constantly building reports, diving into raw data and looking at what that raw data is, taking that and transforming it into meaningful reports and meaningful visualizations that the company or clients that we're working for can use, and presenting that back to the client, and also meeting with the client to kind of develop next steps and to kind of see where the trajectory is going for that particular ask. Sometimes, depending on the client, we have short-term engagements that only last maybe a few months. And then we have long-term recurring engagements where we're doing a lot of the day-to-day maintenance and changes on those reports. To give you an example of something that I'm working on currently, is building out a kind of a whole suite of reporting for a company, and we're looking at delivery metrics, we're looking at transportation and order filling and all those kind of things. This particular one isn't necessarily related to healthcare, but we're building those kind of things and looking at all these different kind of financial metrics, where the opportunity is, where the excess capacity for this business is, and all those kind of things, and building those into robust and usable automated tools that clients can use.
Thank you for that overview, especially when you start digging into examples within and external to healthcare. When we think about data in general, it's either a core component of what we do every day at one end of the spectrum, somebody who is looking at spreadsheets, doing the statistical analysis, creating the dashboards that reports back to somebody else. Or there's sometimes the other end of the spectrum where somebody says, I don't touch data at all, or even if I'm not looking at a 1 and 0, I never have to think about data. As you're sharing that now, it sounds like there's an entire spectrum of what you do falling across both of those ends. Can you share with us what that looks like as far as either your experiences in healthcare or your past experiences and working really in depth with the data, or just feeling like you don't have a role in it? How does that reflect in what you do day to day?
Well, a lot of it kind of depends. In the ultimate, anytime that you build any kind of report or any kind of data driven project, is you have to know your end user and your audience. So depending on who I'm talking to and who I'm presenting to, for example, may depend on the level of granularity and the level of specifics that I get into. For example, just before this call, we were going over that robust suite of reports that we've been building out for the client. And all morning I've been talking really with the client partner that I'm developing that with, and we're talking about day-to-day numbers and how these metrics are calculated and where they're matching up and all that kind of stuff. But when the presentation that I kind of gave this afternoon, just before this call, it was more of a broad spectrum. Like, this is what this report does. This is what it does. And these people don't necessarily care how I calculated the measure. They just want to know that the measure works like it's supposed to, and it's going to give them the insight that they need to make those business related decisions. So there is, like you said, there is that gambit almost of or spectrum of where you're operating, and that it constantly shifts, because I can even be having a conversation with a project manager or another colleague internal with what I'm going on, and doing those kind of things. Hang on, we got a guest. My daughter has snuck into the room. You want to say hi to everybody? And say hi. Okay, well, you have to go in there for right now. All right. Sorry about that, but anyway, that's that's not my daughter, it's my personal assistant. She's going on break. That's what she was asking about. Anyway, so yeah, there is that level, and there's all across the spectrum, and you have those discussions where you may be talking about SQL code and working on the nuts and bolts of DAX queries and all that kind of stuff, and really diving into it. And then 30 minutes later, you might be looking at a 30,000 feet level, just overview of what it is. So that constantly changes all day long.
I appreciate that day-to-day perspective too. And I'll invite any of our attendees before we transition out of our day-to-day to talking more about what brought Dr. Cooper to the position that he's in today. I wanted to at least get a sense of what does the working environment look like. And with your personal assistant, the reason I'm bringing this up is the tools that we use as pharmacists that the majority of us are reflected in attendance here today are probably a little bit different than what you experience on your day-to-day environment. Can you just share with us what it's like to interact with your team, or when you're making a presentation? What are the tools you're looking at? Is it in front of a computer, or is it in person? What does that look like?
It's a combination of both. Primarily, it's through the computer. We use Microsoft Teams for just about everything, whether it's doing presentations to clients or just having discussions and developing things within our internal teams. Most of that is run through that. We do have the delivery center, is what we call it, based in Maryland, our headquarters, and we do have quite a few people that work there. So they still do in-person kind of things, and we have those things as well. But as we continue to grow the company, we have an office in the Netherlands. We have an office in India, and we're actually opening up an office in Denver. So as we expand, we continue to do that. But at the same time, depending on what the client's needs are and what the business's needs are, we go. I go to the headquarters maybe once a quarter or something like that. I've got probably a trip coming up the end of March to go there and spend the week there to work. And a lot of times we do that just to help build, teamwork and that kind of stuff, and help develop relationships between the teams. And also, if the client requests, we're always going to, jump on a plane or jump in a car and do an in-person presentation or training or something like that as it needs. But yeah, there's definitely no mortar and pestles or pill trays or things like that. I do have some over there on the shelf just in case. I guess I need them to pull off the shelf. But it's a lot different. It's a lot different, and a lot of it's the same, because you think about the things that you track as a pharmacist, whether you're looking at metrics, you're still using Excel and those kind of things. And even if you're pulling information out of a dispensing software system or things like that, you're doing some transitions with data there, but it gets just a little bit more advanced the deeper that you get.
Excellent. Well, I'll keep an eye on our chat as we pause here to transition from what day to day looks like and how your journey took you to where you are today. And really, the goal of our conversation today is to talk about what it looks like to reflect your skill set in something like a portfolio. And in our previous conversations, you've been so kind as to share how that's factored into your journey. And I'll build in that pause before we jump into those resources too, for anyone who might have those questions there. When you started your practice in pharmacy, or when you started working with data, all of these questions are a little bit different. What do I need to reflect? What do I need to show that I'm able to do? Can you share with us a little bit on your journey to get to where you are today in terms of your working career development, and how did portfolios play a role in that?
Absolutely. So, just to kind of give some overall background about myself. So, I graduated pharmacy school from the University of Tennessee in 2011. So, I've been out of school just about 11 years. So, not too far gone from the classroom, but enough to have a little bit of experience. Started out, did a brief stint with an independent pharmacy that was opening up in my hometown. I'm from rural West Tennessee, so there's not a whole lot of big opportunities as far as big healthcare systems. There's kind of only one or two around, so opportunities like that were kind of limited. So started out with a small independent pharmacy, but that didn't really work out. Wasn't a good path, a good way to start for me. So ended up going to long-term care and dealt with nursing home and did some consulting and that kind of stuff in the long-term care space. Did that for about 5 years. Really enjoyed that, and that really kind of got me started into my data journey. One of the things that we did kind of before electronic charting was a big deal, especially in the nursing home setting, is as a pharmacist in long-term care, one of the mandates from CMS is that you have to do chart reviews on all your patients um, once a month. And that can be a very time-consuming process, especially when you've got a facility that's 100 plus, bed facility. So we were looking at ways to try to streamline that process and make our time in the nursing homes more efficient, so that we could, get our noses, so to speak, out of the chart and actually interact with the staff, especially the staff leadership, and spend more time doing that and helping just, with patient issues, and being able to be more of a resource than just a guy that's sitting in the corner digging through a chart. Um, so in order to do that, what the big thing we did is we developed, we had our IT department develop a SQL query that dumped all the dispensing data out of our frameworks dispensing software into an Excel file, and we just developed pivot tables and some Power Query stuff to basically create an electronic chart before we had an electronic charting system in the nursing home. And through that, we were able to develop a bunch of different reports and stuff on our own that really streamlined that process. So we knew that we could go in and do a lot of the work beforehand and kind of say, okay, there's been no changes with this patient over the last 30 days, no medication changes, none of these things. So that's not a patient necessarily that we have to worry about this month, or these are the med changes that we did have, or these are the ones that require gradual dose reductions or things like that. So we did all that tracking, so we were able to really streamline that process, and that really was where my data adventure and journey kind of started. So I did that for about 5 years, and then from that, um, went into community practice. Did that for about 2 years. Worked for Kroger, and again, there's all kinds of metrics and things that you were trying to track. And at that point, my data journey was like, okay, I have all this work that I have to do, all these prescriptions that I have to check, and I'm drowning in all this. But the company also wants me to follow all these metrics and be able to do all this work. How can I make my life easier by kind of combining the two and trying to find a way to work this together? And so that was kind of where I started looking into what are the opportunities to learn that kind of stuff so I could make my life easier. Um, from there, I left Kroger and went to an independent community practice that was getting into kind of the long-term care specialty packaging type business. And so that I brought my background in long-term care for specialty packaging and unit dose packaging into the independent arena. And we were looking at developing delivery systems and packaging systems for the like group homes, assisted living, and some of those opportunities. So that's kind of where I was until this. And aside from that, also one of the things that I had got involved in here in the state of Tennessee, we have a nonprofit organization called One Tennessee, which is a group that focuses on helping educate prescribers on best practices for opioid management and stewardship. So that was a thing that I kind of got involved in on the as called academic detailing, and part of that was using those tools and making data driven recommendations. So one of the things from there, I actually had the opportunity to go to Boston and go to the a big conference about academic detailing, and I met a lot of people from places like the VA and other big health systems that were doing all of this analytic profiling and all this kind of stuff. And I was just like, this stuff is really cool. It was something that I was really interested in, just a nerd out on something. And so from there is where I really started. Once I kind of got back from that conference, I really decided, I was like, okay, I'm going to learn those skill sets, because I think, and this was the statement or the thought process that kind of got me started down this journey, is like healthcare is behind every other industry as far as their reporting and looking at data and making and using those metrics and all the data that they do have to make good decisions. So I was thinking to myself, there's going to be a time and there's going to be a need for somebody who can walk in both worlds. So I already had the clinical expertise. I'd been a pharmacist for 10 years. I'd done that. I understood all the clinical aspects of it. So my next question was, okay, how do I learn how to communicate with the technical side of it, so I can be able to say, okay, well, these are the things that we need to do. And I was kind of almost thinking about not necessarily being as hands-on, but being able to dive into those things and being able to communicate to both teams on either side, the clinical team and more of the technology team, to help answer those questions and using those data-driven resources to do that.
I always appreciate how much authenticity you bring in sharing your journey, but also how forward thinking, or at least how you never really expect certain experiences to fit into others until they happen. And even then, sometimes you need a little bit of lag time to look back on it and say, oh, yeah, I guess I did do that back when I was in retail or long term care. And each of those transitions that you shared had a unique change in function, but there is that common thread in between: asking the right question, understanding and user needs, and some of the technical details that you mentioned as well. And as we turn towards our discussion of portfolios, if you can reflect back, and it's always hard to think about the bias when you reflect back, what were your thoughts around some of those technical skills, or some of the value or barriers of coming into working with data as a pharmacist? Were there doubts or challenges or things that you thought you did really well at that time when you were after that conference and thinking, how can we get healthcare to be better at doing this thing that a lot of other people are doing?
Absolutely. Well, so when I sat down and kind of said, all right, I'm going to learn this thing. And one of the things, and there's a term for it, and I can't remember exactly what it is, but the concept is especially sometimes when we have these high degrees and we have these big diplomas hanging on the walls, we begin to think of ourselves as experts, and we are, as pharmacists, the medication experts, and we do have all that expertise and knowledge. But just because you have knowledge in that one niche doesn't mean it always transfers over to something else. You see that a lot with medical professionals that think that they can be business leaders, or they can, run their own business or run their side business. Just because they're an expert in medicine or surgery or pharmacy or something like that doesn't mean that they're going to make good financial decisions and financial choices. But because we have the diplomas and been told, and been called doctor and been told that, we're really smart, that we think we can spread that out over kind of just any kind of topic that we want. And that was a really big concern for myself. And I told myself going in, it's like, you have to remember that you don't know anything about what you're talking about. And as my wife will probably tell you, that's hard for me to do, is to admit sometimes that I don't have, the expertise and the knowledge about what I'm talking about. But in order to be able to do what I was going to do, I had to tell myself, like, look, you're starting from the bottom, it's okay. You don't know anything, and that's okay. If worst comes to worst, you could always be a pharmacist for the rest of your life. You can always, always dispense medicine. You can always work in those traditional roles, and there's nothing wrong with those traditional roles. But as like somebody just said in the comments, that lifelong learning. Once you kind of plateau in pharmacy, you kind of get to the point where you kind of know most how everything works. You're just adding new drugs and new things to it. We have that type A personality. We want to look for something else and to kind of dive into it. So that was my process, is my first kind of thinking. But developing a portfolio, and knowing that my goal is to find a way to transition into a role. I wasn't really sure what that role was going to look like yet, but I wanted to step away from the pharmacy bench, so to speak, and get into a role that had data-driven responsibilities. And in order to do that, I had to set myself some goals and had to realize that I have to be able to showcase that in some way. And there's obviously a lot of different ways that you can do that. You can do the boot camps, or you can go back and get a master's degree, and you can do all those things. And all those things are great, but the other option there is to develop a portfolio, because, I don't necessarily need a portfolio, so to speak, to be a pharmacist. I mean, I've got a degree, I've got a resume, I've got work experience, I'm licensed in 3 states. I have the credentials, so to speak, to do that. So, but I didn't have that for data. So the question then is how did I do that? So from there, I started taking online courses through a company called Maven Analytics, and there's other courses and offerings that you can find. But one of the things that they offer as part of their community is they give you a data set to work on every month. It's kind of like a challenge, like, and there's several of those like on LinkedIn and that kind of stuff. So that was goal number 1, is I'm gonna go through these courses, and I'm going to learn this stuff, but I'm going to build a dashboard once a month, and then I'm going to put that out there for the world to see. And I did that through LinkedIn and through some other things that we'll talk about when we get into the specifics of that thing. But the first step is really deciding that you're going to have to put yourself out there. You're going to have to show your growth, and you're going to have to put it where people can see it. Because if they can't see it, they don't know that you have that skill set. If you don't showcase it, then nobody's going to know. I can say all day long that I'm a data analyst and I can do data. Well, prove that. How do I prove that? And you do that through a portfolio.
I love it. It's queuing up some great questions already in our chat. I'll reflect back. You're asking yourself these questions at that point of making the transition. Where do these expertise lie? If there isn't a degree, then how do I get into working with data as a pharmacist? And then I'll think about it. Is it the Dunning-Kruger effect, that when you know a little bit, that you think you know a lot of it?
Yeah, there's like the graph.
Yeah. Oh, that's always a good one. And I think that's interesting, because portfolios almost work against that. You have to be able to, another key component that we always talk about in our world in practice of innovation, show, don't just tell. and portfolios allow for that pathway. And it sounds like you were at this point of transition. You were ready to make a jump, or at least a frame to the new skill set that you had. And you started using Maven Analytics as at least a pathway to challenge yourself both on a timeline and with data sets. What happened next? What's the when you find these resources, how did you evaluate it, or how did you say this is the one that I'm going to be working towards, and how did that lead to eventually your portfolio?
So really, when you decide to kind of do data as a profession, there's so many different avenues that you can get into. And the question really you really have to kind of ask yourself, what level do you want to be involved in? So if you really like the back end statistical analysis coding part, like probably many of your students do who are doing the R and Python in this course that you're teaching, then maybe data engineering, data science is something more along their aspect. For me, before I became a pharmacist, I had a marketing background. So I did a lot of design for publications and advertisements and all that. So I have a pretty good visual eye to make things look nice. So you tie that in with my interest for data, and that brings you to platforms like Power BI and Tableau and Looker and Sisense and those kind of things. So figuring out kind of, you have such a broad path, being able to kind of narrow it down to where you want to go really helps you start. Now, along that journey, you're going to pick up some skills that can kind of bleed over into other things. So, maybe you start with data science and then you kind of really get involved with, oh, I really like the visualization part. So then I move over to, you can kind of transition them back and forth. But a big step is kind of really deciding on where you want to be in that level, or in that environment, and kind of seeing where you want to go. And then from there, it's just really, there's so many opportunities as far as learning this kind of stuff. I mean, you can do it for free on things like YouTube. There's some great YouTube resources to learn, like Power BI and R and SQL and all those kind of just free. I went with Maven simply because I liked their structure. I liked the way they had their courses lined out, the way they had their path lined out. They gave you learning paths that you could kind of follow based on those choices that you make. Like, one of the things that they first do when you first kind of join into their program is they give you like an assessment test, like, what are you interested in? And they'll say, from your interest, we kind of think that you would probably like data visualization more, or they may like data science more. And then from that, they kind of build you out a curriculum and saying, hey, these are some courses that you should take, at least to start with, so you can kind of gauge your interest on certain things and certain platforms, and then you can kind of adjust it as you go. And then the other cool thing about Maven is they give you virtual badges, and I just like collecting things like that. So that was kind of the selling point for me. I was like, oh, you mean I have, and again, that's another tool that you can put in your tool. And if we'll get to my LinkedIn profile here in just a little bit, but like, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, those badges on what I've completed and what courses I've taken are shown and illustrated, and that just helps boost that portfolio that much more.
Excellent. These are awesome questions that I really hope our students appreciate hearing from practice. And as much as I love being the educator who can share some of these tools, hearing it from somebody who lives it and breathes it, I think, means all the more. And some of the questions that I'll allude to here that we came in the chat, and it sounds like you're queuing up kind of our next section, actually looking and seeing what portfolios look like. Some of the questions that I want to at least acknowledge and make sure that we address from your perspective is one, I'll take them backwards in which they're shared. What kind of output do you think best showcases work as a data analyst? Is it really the charts or the code? And I think you might have addressed that a little bit, going back to based on what you want to be able to do. Can you share just a little bit of how did you select which chart, or what helps define what pathway you're going down, and what helped you make that decision?
Right. Well, as far as from a portfolio aspect and from just a thought process, the number one thing that you need to do is you have to answer a question. You have to give me some kind of insight. If you look at COVID data, why does COVID, you can give me all this beautiful code, but if the code doesn't tell, if I can't look at the code in 10 seconds and say, okay, this is what this code tells me, then it doesn't mean anything to me. But if I can look at a report and it doesn't have to be a Power BI report, it can be a PowerPoint presentation, or it can be anything. But these are the insights that I gained from the skills that I have based on this topic. So let's just take, COVID, for example. You know, Based on the data that I was able to collect and run a code on or develop a dashboard or whatever, I can tell you that over the last 6 months that COVID related deaths have trended down, 30%, but they've only trended down in 5%, let's say in the Northeast versus 25% in the Southwest. Or that France has a higher uptick this week compared to what it was this time last year. Being able to show and illustrate those in a concise thing is your first point of interest. Because if I can't see that and say, oh well, that's cool. How did they get? Then my next question is, how did they get to that? That's where you show your technical skill. Well, this is the code that I wrote that pulled the data from the data.gov, or this is the API address that I used to pull this in, or these are how I merged these 4 tables from a SQL database and built it all together. And this is how I put it together. And this is how I built it. So you start with your solution. You basically work backwards. So you present, hey, this is the cool thing that I learned from the project that I built, and this is how I did it. As far as what type of data or what kind of information that you want to showcase, the best thing that you can do is find something that you're interested in. So, and it may not necessarily be pharmacy related. If you go back through some of the ones that I did that were not, I did that were just specific to the things I did and not related to challenges, I purposely stayed away from COVID data for probably a year and a half, simply because everybody and their brother had a COVID chart. And I was like, I didn't want to, do that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I did look at was, the one COVID thing that I did was, how did COVID affect nursing homes? Because I had nursing home experience. So that was something unique that I could do. I looked at tags and deficiencies that nursing home gets during state audits. I looked at that. But other things I did, I took the NCAA football championship data for the last 10 years, built a dashboard out of it. I did things like that. There's tons of data out there. So in order to keep your interest and keep you progressing forward, pick topics that you're interested in, whether it's, soccer, football, sports, whether it's healthcare related, whether it's financial, data. People are doing stuff on cryptocurrencies and, financial reportings on all these, Fortune 500 companies. You can track UFO sightings and shark attacks. And it's whatever you want. But the key thing there is to do something that you're interested in.
I love that framing of a portfolio isn't meant to just highlight your hardest work, but really some of the most easy to understand that reflects what you're able to do. And in the next question that I hope will tee off a little bit more of the interactive display of what a portfolio might look like, we had a question that asked, what was the most important part of the portfolio that either gave you the confidence when you were making that transition to from the conference or that state of mind you were in to what you're doing now? Is there any one example that highlights, or that you remember feeling once you made it, thinking, yeah, I can do this, or this is something that's really helpful and really good? If that translates to anything you would like to share, I've added co-host in case you need to screen share, or if there's anything I can share on my behalf.
No, I think the big thing there was when I did my first Maven challenge, and I built it, and just kind of looking at different dashboards and that kind of stuff, just looking at other designs and other outputs. I'm like, okay, am I on the level? Am I remotely close? And one of the things that I ask, and this is a thing that you have to be able to do, is ask for feedback for people who are doing it longer than you do. And most of those people are going to give you constructive criticism. But one of the things I was asking is, am I doing this right? Do these things look right? And some of the feedback I got was like, wow, I can't believe this is your first dashboard that you've ever designed. It has the look and feel of something that's been done, and that speaks to my design background that I had before, a long back ago. But at the same time, I got some feedback that says, hey, you should have thought about this, or you should have done that. But at the same time, when I was in some of those first competitions, I was in the top 10% as far as like, and I made it to the final round a couple of times as far as like winning it. So I knew then that I was kind of on point, as far as getting there. And it was really just kind of refining those skills from there to kind of see where it went.
Thank you for that insight too. Iteration's hard when you don't have a standard or a rubric. Knowing
Right.
what you're doing best is hard to do.
And I even go back and look at some of those dashboards that I've built. I'm like, oh man, that looks like crap. I should really go back and redo that. But at the same time, I'm like, oh no, no, I'm gonna leave it because it shows my progress from. But knowing what I know now, and even just changing the way I do some things, and from a personal standpoint, looking at it, I'm like, yeah, I see where now. I see now, 8 months later, I see now where I could have improved that. But even then, I was like, hey, I was putting that out there, and putting yourself out there is what's going to draw that attention. That's going to give you that first opportunity to dive into a data world.
Excellent. And so as we've been talking about show, don't tell, the two frameworks would be, one, is there anything you would like to share with us as we're looking at options in examples? And two, what kinds of resources might you suggest, whether they be specific tools or whether they be anything related to what you had just mentioned, finding the things you're interested in?
Sure. Let me share my screen, and I will show you guys and you guys may have already checked me out, and that's completely fine. But this is my portfolio, or this is my LinkedIn page, and I think this is going to be the place that that 90% of the people who find you are going to find you. So LinkedIn is highly important, and one of those things that you guys have got to do is this has to be your main stop, I think, because this is where most of the conversations are going to happen. So it's a great place. So you can kind of see, I'm utilizing this background image to kind of draw attention to some of the things that I've done. I've got an address from my own website, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But highlighting some of these courses and stuff that I've taken through Maven, that I'm also a Microsoft certified data analyst. Those are kind of things. This is going to be the first stop that a potential employer or recruiter is going to see. So, having a professional picture, I mean, it's little things, it's something, but those little things are dominoes that stack up. Um, having proper titles. So data analyst is what I do day to day. Pharmacist is what I've been trained to and still active, I don't necessarily practice day to day, but I still have active license and could hop back into it at any time if I needed to. Medical writer is something that I do on the side, kind of as some side projects that I do for that. Then the next big thing is going to be your featured section. And if you go and look at some of these posts, some of these call outs, these are things that I built. And I'm putting those out there for the world to see. And the world may say, hey, that sucks. Or, hey, you can get better, or whatever the case may be. But those things, need to be there, and you need to do it on a consistent basis. I set it myself a goal at least once a month. If you've got more time than that and you can do 2 a month or whatever, but I was like, you know what? I've got a family at home. I've got a lot of stuff going on. I'm a pharmacist, 40 plus hours during the week. I don't have a lot of time to do, but I'm going to dedicate it to do at least one a month. So those are those kind of things that I was building out. And, having those to where, there's 4 or 5 of those, in here that people can go back and see. So using that featured column and having that opportunity to where people can look at this. And this is one thing on the other side of it that I absolutely look for on a day-to-day basis. You know, our team we're a growth company, so we're constantly looking for new talent and new people. And if I don't have this, you know, I can go through my contacts and look and see, okay, you know, they have Power BI experience or they have this or that. If I can't see this, or if I don't have a website that I can see what they're talking about, I go to the next person. So if I don't have that or that, then sorry, it's going to be the next person. And, you know, and going down from there, obviously, you know, the rest of the stuff is having your experience and all that kind of stuff, licenses and certification. These are all just icing on the cake as far as, you know, those kind of things. But your featured section and this top spot, especially having a place to send people after they've kind of met you and kind of, because the next question that you're going to get, if a recruiter comes to my page and looks at this and they're going to say, okay, this guy looks like he knows what he's talking about, the next question is going to be, Clay, where do I learn more about you? Where do I see some of your work? Where do I do those things? And that might be a website. It could be, I know I was reading through some of y'all's discussions in your coursework, talking about Canvas or, you know, GitHub. One of those, there's a whole bunch of different opportunities, and it may just be dependent on what you want to kind of dive into. But having that next step, the next landing place is the place to be. So from there, you know, I send people to my website. And looking at that, still again, having some of the same information. It's a little bit more detailed. But, you know, right here, boom, right off the bat, portfolio. And these are all kinds of dashboards that I've built that you can go to, click on them, check them out, give you some insight on what's going on with them. And, you know, even putting a tiny URL to where you can pull up and interact with the report. So now through like Power BI and stuff, like, you know, this is fully, you know, people can come in here and play with this. So, you know, if they want to be able to adjust this and kind of say, okay, well, this guy really knows. So from this, you know, there's enough here for that person to make a decision. Yes, he warrants an interview, or no, he doesn't. And that's what you want. You want to provide them enough opportunity and enough information in that portfolio that they can explore it and see that. You know, here's another thing that I have that's, you know, credentials that we're talking about. And again, that's just those highlighted things that those coursework and things like that. My internet must be running a little slow.
As it's loading, if I can jump in with a question, and knowing
Sure.
that we'll probably talk more about some of these resources, what's your background with web design and development? Do I need to know HTML, CSS, all the front end, back end when it comes to making a website?
No, I mean, with things like WordPress, you know, a lot, and even like things, I know Wix was another thing that was mentioned in the in the group chat with your students, is that, you know, a lot of this stuff is drag and drop. But you're gonna have to put in the time and the effort to make it look professional. So if you don't know how to do that, you know, that's another skill set that you can learn, and that just adds that much more to it. But if you don't, you know, sometimes you're gonna, and this just gonna depends on where you are, but sometimes you got to put a little money at it. So I mean, hosting your own personal website and having that stuff, you know, you got to spend a little bit of money on it. You got to spend a little bit of time on it. You got to be able to go in here and update things and spend those kind of things on it. So it's more a commitment as far as time than it would be from anything else. But, you know, this is nothing. You know, my portfolio is nothing, you know, extravagant. It's nothing that cost me a lot of money. I didn't pay for somebody professionally to put it together, but there's enough information there that showcases enough of my talent that it takes me to the next level, and the next interview level. And that's what you want. You want to be able to get your foot in the door and put yourself above the 50 other people that have put in that application.
Excellent. So thank you for sharing so much of your portfolio, and it is available either in links or something that's shared with the class here. As we think about what it takes to build one, I think we painted already a great and rich narrative of what questions you should be asking yourself, how you can start identifying the things that go into your portfolio. I have a short list of resources that I want to at least reflect back to you and ask, what am I missing, or how do I find more? From the platforms you've mentioned, Power BI sounds like one that is commonly used for yourself. And I want to come back to it if you can tell us a little bit more about Power BI, but other ones that you've mentioned, some of the more technical skill sets like SQL, SQL, Python or R, Tableau for visualization. And then in building or developing a portfolio, you mentioned LinkedIn. You mentioned creating your own website using something like WordPress, as you showed us, or as we've shared in our other discussion, things like Wix or website builders that you don't have to be very technically inclined to be able to use. It's just drag and drop. Is there any resource that's missing or something that might have left out of that list that you shared today? And if not, can you tell us just a little bit more about Power BI before we talk a little bit about just job hunting in general in the world of data?
Sure. Well, one thing that a lot of people ask is, and you see it is where do I find the data? Where do I find the things to start with? Because I have to have something. And there are a ton of different resources. The federal government has a lot of data. Sometimes it's not the most, clean, and it's sometimes hard to kind of decipher through. But places like data.gov, Kaggle is another place. Maven Analytics has a data playground that is free that you can dive in. And so there's all kinds of resources out there. Just Google free data set and you can find whatever. And a lot of that's sometimes that can challenge your skills. Like you may start out with just a simple Excel spreadsheet, but you can work your way up to things like APIs and web scrapings and all that kind of stuff, depending on the tool that you're working on. And if as far as Power BI is concerned, so Power BI is Microsoft's equivalent to Tableau. And if you look at the Gartner quadrant that they look at as far as business intelligence, Microsoft is kind of up in the top. I guess it would be top right corner as far as like the champion of the industry right now. Tableau is a close second. And then you've got other places like Looker, SciSense, ThoughtSpot, some of those other ones. Quick is another one that's coming that are kind of the up and comers. Microsoft, especially Power BI, is the reason that it's so up in the top corner is that it brings along with it the Microsoft Power Pack and the Power Apps and the Power Suites that go with it, and the ability to integrate with all the other Microsoft products. And as Microsoft continues to rule the world, they will continue to, they bought GitHub. So, there could be an opportunity to see where they integrate GitHub with those kind of things. And there's all kinds of opportunities. Tableau is the same way. Tableau and those kind of places own the similar types of businesses. So integration with those things are done well. But I personally like Power BI. That's just where I got started. And the reason I picked Power BI is, I'm one of those people that just because everybody's doing it, I'm going to go do the opposite. Kind of like everybody was building a COVID dashboard, so I'm not going to build a COVID dashboard. Everybody works in if we look at the company that I work for now, there's probably just in the BI segment, there's probably about 40 or 50 of us. And I've only been doing this a year, and I am the person with the most Power BI expertise, other than the outside consultants that we bring in. We're kind of slowly bringing in more team members that have that, but everybody, when we have like 30 or 40 people that are really good in Tableau, but like I'm the only one or one of the few that really, plays in Power BI on a daily basis. So, and that's not to say that Tableau is better than the other one. It's better than the other, because one of the things I'm trying to do to broaden my own skill set is now that I've got a good handle on Power BIs, I'm diving into Tableau slowly but surely.
And I'll reflect back a couple of things that we at least highlight when we're talking about platforms. On the definition side, the BI side is business intelligence, correct? It's Power Business Intelligence, and Tableau has been more recent, but not the only thing that's existed for as long as all of these other platforms have. I've shared with the audience here, at least the Microsoft interpretation, rah rah celebration. Look at how long we've been in that top right quadrant as a leader. And your final point that you bring up is a lot of these platforms are different, but within a company, you'll have people with varied experiences in many of them. Can you share with a little bit of what it's like to have multiple experiences with multiple platforms? Do you need to have multiple years of experience in order to claim that you know it? Or how did you feel confident to say, yeah, I can work with Power BI rather than just, oh, I'm dabbling with this software platform?
Right. Well, that's where your portfolio comes in. I mean, and that's one of those things. If you can showcase those skills and those things speak for yourself. And to give you the perfect example is like the job that I have currently, I didn't apply for it. So somebody saw my skills and saw my portfolio on LinkedIn, and they said, "Hey, I wanted to talk to you." I was like, "I don't have anything yet, but I wanted us to kind of meet and develop a relationship so that we could kind of see, if there's something in the future that's coming up, we can talk." And then that timeline shrank rapidly, faster than I think both of us thought that it was going to. And then within probably about 3 or 4 months of us meeting, he had offered me a job. And I never applied for it. I never did anything like that. But having that presence and being involved in the data community and having that portfolio just moved that threshold that much faster.
That's fantastic. I can't wait. I wish that among all of our learners here today, that your portfolios are so good and your ability to represent yourself, that jobs get offered your way. And as we transition a little bit to our question and answer open that I'll keep an eye on the chat for, I did want to bring up one before that I'll have to rephrase. I was going to ask, how do you set yourself apart in the job hunt with folks who have data analytic backgrounds or have this previous experience? But I'll generalize that to your portfolio. Is there anything you should specialize or discuss, make explicit when it comes to being a pharmacist or a background in pharmacy, or if you're pursuing interests outside of healthcare? How would you reflect that in the work that you show, not just talk about it?
So, I mean, you can take it at two different levels. So, like one of the things that, originally, like when I was talking about it before, I really wanted to be that person that kind of walked in both worlds. So some of the first discussions that I was having with just kind of wanting, and this was, I was kind of approaching it from a wanting to learn standpoint was, I reached out to the chief medical information officer at the local health system. It's like, hey, like I'm learning how to do this. I don't, you know, do you have something that I can learn? Is there opportunity? So not only do you don't necessarily have to change and transition jobs, because I've talked to a lot of pharmacists that are asking, well, how do I do what you did? How do I jump ship? How do I do? And I was like, look for opportunities where you are. So I had a guy that I talked to not too long ago that he was kind of dabbling in this, and he was kind of learning, and he had been involved in some projects, and he's like, but I really want to learn more. I was like, just ask. It's like shut and tell, like, hey, like I've learned, tell them, like I've learned these skills. I want to do this. I want to step up those kind of things. You know, can I have the opportunity? Can I take, and start small? Can I take 20% of my time? Can I take one day a week to have a project that's not time constraint or anything like that that I can work on and have that time? And if they say yes, that's awesome. If they don't, but at the same time, that's when you start looking for those other opportunities where you can have conversations with organizations or things that you are involved in to have that opportunity, whether it's your current employer or if you're looking in a job market, be like, hey, what are opportunities that I have to expand and grow either in data or pharmacy practice or how can I merge the two together, and having those discussions are what what leads to those opportunities. And sometimes those opportunities don't exist and you have to go find them elsewhere. But starting where you are is a great place to start.
I think that's a great kind of milestone takeaway that everyone can learn a little bit about what data means to them by just figuring out what resources, opportunities, or things they want to make for themselves, starting where they are. And I'll look forward as I'll ask Dr. Cooper any kind of closing thoughts and comments, as I want to thank you again for taking the time and sharing so much of what you've learned with folks here, whether it's our learners or those across our profession who are excited about working with data but want to learn how to do it and make very clear what they know through portfolios like these. So thank you for taking the time. To our students, please do feel free to connect with Dr. Cooper on LinkedIn, and maybe send a chat of appreciation in him taking his time out today, and not only from work, but from your personal assistant and family. I do appreciate that. Any closing thoughts or comments, and then we'll cut the recording and we'll invite any kind of after discussion as well.
Sure. Yeah, I'm an open book. I encourage people to reach out and we can set up some time and have discussions and kind of dive through things. And I tell people that if somebody like me can pull this off and do this and make it work, I think anybody can. You just have to put the time and the effort into it and make the commitments. It's not rocket science. I mean, if you can get your PharmD, you can do this stuff. You know how to learn and you know how to apply those skills, and you have the mentality and the skill set to learn and to do those things. So transitioning that to something else is very easy, I think, for pharmacists and for people of that kind of background. So it's just making the commitment to wanting to change your life and saying that I can do it or I want to do it versus I can't do it.
Fantastic message to end on. Great.